this week is a chance for us to start looking at practice, both in your professional and personal life, and taking action. And in order for us to take action, there needs to be a behaviour shift. So what we've been doing in the first few weeks is looking at and identifying what is your behaviour. How do you respond? How do you think? How do you act? Because all of us have an impact and all of us take action. And even if you're not taking any action, a non-action, that's still an action, right? That's still having an impact. So when we start to look at behaviour change, it can be quite complex. We can look at it from many different points of view. And ultimately the question comes down to, why do people not take more action for sustainability, right? And let's start to break it down. There's been a lot of research around this, but this is my take on it so far. The first is that we're human. And as humans, we tend to be looking out for ourselves. We are hardwired for survival, and we're constantly, subconsciously but constantly, scanning the environment for threats, right? And we're, what's going to threaten me? And it could be a physical threat, that could harm us. Or it could be an emotional threat, could be a threat to a sense of belonging perhaps, or a threat to social structures or a sense of dignity or worth. So constantly we're scanning the environment for how do I fit in? Am I safe? Am I physically safe? And I'm emotionally safe. And so because we're hardwired for that, and that's quite a useful thing as well, right? Because it helps us get to where we are right now. But there can be a downside to that. And that is, we tend to be thinking about ourselves, right? We tend to be thinking about ourselves and our own stories and what's important to us. And so it takes operating a different part of the brain, not just living in survival mode, but operating more into the frontal cortex, okay, the more conscious, aware, where you can start to observe and reflect on your actions and critique those, to then get to a place where we can start to look outside of ourselves. So what does it take for somebody to move out of survival into the frontal cortex? Well, it takes safety of those physical needs. We've already looked at Maslow and sustaining some of those physical needs. And so it's very, very difficult if somebody's super hungry or they don't have a roof over their head. They're super stressed constantly. And this may be some of you. Just have a moment to reflect and think do you feel overwhelmed? Do you feel constantly stressed out? What is it that you've created in your workplace or in your study or in your environment that might lead to you being in survival mode? And I say that you have created it, which is controversial, but then that's where the shift comes in of how am I responding? And I know for some of us, potentially all of us, we could go back in time and identify different experiences or moments or historical wounding, ancestral wounding, when perhaps our identity or our culture was threatened. And I'm not saying that any of that's okay. I'm not agreeing with it. I'm not saying that you have to think it's okay. What I'm saying is that how we respond to what has happened to us is something that we have control over. Unfortunately, we don't have control over how others treat us or how others have historically treated us. And if we are constantly blaming another, the government, other cultures, other people, then we hand over a lot of power and a lot of control into things external to us. But when we take full responsibility, I believe that we take back that control and we take back that power. And we say, hey, this is not okay, but I'm gonna stop blaming you. I'm gonna challenge myself to try and understand your point of view. Very, very difficult, because remember, our ego wants to be right and that often puts us into a fight mode or a fight, flight, freeze, survival response mode. And that can be what our immediate response or our immediate action wants to be. And this is where your own philosophy comes in on how do you fight the battles that are around you, and how has it been working for you so far? Is being in fight mode something that's really serving you, or do you find that it's draining and tiring? And again, I know that this is all controversial and might be a flip around. I'm just sharing a part of my belief system, in that I think the thing that's easiest, that I have the most control over, the ability to change, is myself and my beliefs and the way I show up in the world. And through that, I believe that I can change or help or influence the people around me and the systems around me. But if I am constantly blaming and perpetuating that cycle of one person is right and one person is wrong, then I don't believe that it's as easy to find a solution in there. There's not so much place in the middle when we're really attached to being right to something. Again, I don't think that means you have to agree with what has happened or agree with the system. But this is where trying to understand the other story can be really helpful, because we can go, wow, I really don't agree with this. I really don't agree with this system. And I wonder what has happened in that person's life, or what has happened around, what is the system around this person or around this situation that has brought them to this point where they think something or they're acting in a way that's so in contrast to my own way of seeing something or acting. So we've probably gone a little bit on a tangent and off topic here, but I think the main thing I want to get across is that when we take full responsibility for the way that we respond and how we treat ourselves, then I think that gives us more power and more control. And no longer are we a victim to what has happened to us or happened to our ancestors, but we can say, hey, it stops with me, and I'm going to make a change and have an impact through a different way of responding. So it kind of goes into the bigger picture of, are your actions and behaviors feeding a system and perpetuating a belief system or a way of being? Or is there another way that's perhaps not easy, but is opening up the door of compassion and of listening and finding that place in the middle? Because if there's any conflict in your life between another person, between systems, between cultures, I can guarantee that the other entity, person, system will also really want to be right. And it will take a higher level of thinking and compassion to be able to be the first one to open up that door, to sit down and say, hey, I want to listen and I want to hear your story. Help me understand how you have got into this place where it's so in contrast to my own experience. And then we will start to see behavior change and behavior shift, and systems around us shift. Let's bring it back to our own behavior change now as well. But the reason why this is important is because if somebody's in survival mode for whatever reason, there's very little chance that they're going to be thinking about how their carbon emissions are affecting the world around them, or perhaps they're in a rush and you're on your way home from study or from work and you go get fast food and it's full of all these packaging and containers. look, life happens, and the better that we can look after ourselves and not be so in that survival response, the more space and capacity that we actually have to think about things outside of ourselves and the impact that we're having. So this is kind of crucial, because if we don't sustain ourselves, which is actually a conversation that's come up a lot this week, if we don't sustain ourselves and look after ourselves, then we can't actually, or our ability to sustain and look after others in the world around us is greatly reduced. So this is giving you full permission to have really good self-care and to do these things that fill you up, that make you feel good, so you can move out of survival mode and into a calmer state, a parasympathetic nervous system state where you have more capacity. The second thing is that sometimes we have conflicting thoughts going on in our brain, and this is called cognitive dissonance. And these conflicting thoughts or beliefs can come up for a multitude of reasons. We've already looked at where some of our belief systems start to come from: our parents, our culture, our historical background, what we've experienced. And this situation is like, oh, I'm walking down the beach and there's all this rubbish, and I know that I should reach down and pick up that rubbish, but I just pretend like it's not there and I just keep walking, right? Or yeah, I really know that I should get around to researching how to make my own cleaning products, because I know what I'm using in my house is really toxic and I don't really enjoy it, but I don't really have time for that, right? So cognitive dissonance is where you think you should be doing one thing, or there's one way, but then there's like another voice in your head going, no, it should be another way. And what this often leads to is conflict, internal conflict and confusion. So it makes a lot of sense that as you've been working through this content and we've been opening up Pandora's box and asking you to reflect on identity and your actions and your behaviors, that you may be feeling a bit of confusion and a bit of conflict, because the identity or the person that you thought you were may now have been challenged, and you may be moving into a new shape, a new thought process, a new way of being. And in that process, in that middle part, it is normal, and I would say unavoidable, to not feel some level of confusion. Again, the way we respond to that, or how we interpret that, can affect how we feel about it. So if we can try and see confusion or conflict as a positive thing, because what it means is that we're challenging a way of being or a belief system, and we're moving into something new, arguably better. And so it's kind of like the storm before it kind of comes back to the calm again. So confusion can be a positive thing if looked at from that angle. And what I often say to students is, like, as soon as you start taking off your blinkers and looking at the world around you, and even within my house, I can just do an exercise. You can look around wherever you are right now. You may be outside, which is a little bit different, but you can even look at the clothes that you're wearing, like, what is this material and how do I know where this comes from? This is wool, right? Merino wool. I know it comes from sheep, but do I know what sheep? No. Do I know what dyes are used? No. What about my house? Oh, okay, there's varnish used on the wood around my house, Did I use a natural product? Is it more toxic? Okay, so it's what we tend to move into is living a life of conflict. You go to the supermarket and you're on the shelf and there's like a product that's fair trade and looks like it's got more recyclable packaging, and then there's another product right next door that looks the same and it's $2 cheaper. So then we're looking at this and we're weighing this up and we're experiencing cognitive dissonance, right? We're trying to weigh up what's more important. Do I go with this belief system that I think I should have or that I want to have, but then I'm also conflicted because there's things going on that prohibit me from being able to do exactly what I want to do, right? So this goes on all the time, and I would love actually for you to be living a life of conflict from now on, because otherwise it means that you could be living in ignorance, right? Of like, oh, my impact doesn't matter, I don't really need to think about that. That's not true. Your impact matters. And I would say, as a human being born on this planet who has access to high quality education, you and I have a responsibility to think about this, right? To start to take the blinkers off and not be ignorant and take 100% responsibility for our actions and the impact that we're having. Challenging, yes. So, living a life of conflict, cognitive dissonance. So what helps us try and get through the other side and be sure about our behaviors and actions and feel good about it? Well, I would say that it's about knowing yourself, knowing your identity, and understanding your value system, which is why we're looking at values in this week as well. Because when you weigh up those different things in terms of environmental impact, social impact, financial impact on you, that tends to be a huge one for people, and 100% we live within a life of constraint. So if we could all buy organically all the time, I'm sure we would, right? Why wouldn't we? But it tends to be organic's more expensive. So then we start to have values conflicts or value weigh ups, like, okay, so what is important for me to put my money into? Is it more important for me to buy this and save money here so I can buy organic? Or am I fine with not buying organic and I'm going to make sure that I have some more money to do some recreational things that are going to complete part of my well-being over here as well? So coming down to the very baseline of our values and what feels good, right? Sometimes it can be that simple, like what feels good. And at the end of the day, if you can sit back and go, you know what, all the actions I did today, I did the best that I could. I can show compassion for myself for the places where I couldn't be a perfect sustainability champion. And I'm happy. I'm happy with what I did today. And that's when the cognitive dissonance starts to get a lot smaller. And I'm not here to say what those actions are, or how much you need to do, or the level of, or what that looks like. That is 100% only you. And only you can sit back and reflect. And at the end of the day, go, actually, I'm really happy with what I did. And if you're sitting here and you're going, man, I'm really not happy with how much I'm contributing, or I feel that level of conflict or dissonance within inside myself, then that's brilliant. That's awesome. Let's celebrate that, because we know that there's something inside of you telling you that you want to do something more, you want to contribute more, you want to feel like you're connected into something bigger, or that you have a wider purpose. Remember that as you're expanding and doing that, please don't forget yourself in all of this, right? Remember to keep sustaining yourself. And when we go back to that fundamental of like, what feels good? Okay, does this action feel good? Does it not feel good? At the end of the day, do I feel good about what I've done? Do I not feel good? You can only know what feels good if you also can feel inside of your body, right? And have a level of connection with yourself, your values, your purpose, your soul, whatever you want to call that. Because remember, our brain is for thinking and our body is for feeling. So cognitive dissonance is very much a pros and cons, weighing up what's good, what's bad, right? And that's what we're trying to move away from in terms of a dichotomy there, or conflicting opinions, or putting things in little boxes, which if we go back to week 1 and week 2, we looked at environmental philosophy and things like that, and it's like, yeah, all these models evolve around trying to put you inside of a box, or having this idea over here or this idea over here. Science is good or science is not good. And what we're moving into here is, where is the and? Is it science can be good, and I also believe that I'm a conservationist, right? I'm going to do the most that I can to reduce my impact. So you can have this cognitive dissonance, conflict in the mind, but where it starts to settle and where you know that you're starting to become more into alignment is when it feels good in your body. So that is a bit of an overview about behavior change. Just to wrap up and sum this up, it's very, very complex. Often we experience cognitive dissonance about what we think we should be doing and what we are doing. We tend to beat ourselves up when we do that, and actually if we can try and hold compassion for ourselves and be kind to ourselves, research has shown that that actually leads to more positive action into the future, which is where looking after yourself, being kind to yourself, sustaining yourself is so, so important, so that you can move out of survival mode and into a more conscious level that has the ability to think outside of yourself and into the world around you. And it's often linked into values, okay? So knowing yourself, being able to feel into what feels good, and at the end of the day, being happy with the decisions that you made. This is behavior change. I'm gonna leave it there, but just know that this is constant work of critical self-reflection. And yes, best of luck as you start to reflect and review the actions that you take on an everyday basis.